good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Women in Islam lecture today. Hope you're having a great day and stay safe and healthy. My name is Ram Kiskin, and I'll be the program moderator for today. To give a brief introduction about myself, I'm from Rhode Island and currently a sophomore at Roger Williams University. I'm studying mechanical engineering and mathematics, and as someone who doesn't get to host many events in the engineering department, I thank to Boston Youth and Dialogue Advocacy for giving me this opportunity as moderator. Today, we gather to discuss what impact Islam have on the roles of women in society. Position of women before Islam was much different than what Islam offered. Before, women did not have businesses, own property, or have independent legal rights, but that changed with Islam. On behalf of Boston Youth and Dialogue Advocacy, we would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Colak and Dr. Considine, who has joined us today. We thank you for giving us your time, and we would also like to thank many organizations who made this event possible. Thank you to Peace Islands Institute Connecticut, Maple Foundation, and Peace Valley Foundation. After the lecture, there will be a Q&A session with our speakers. Please feel free to send us any questions you have in the chat box on the side. All right, before we get started, I would also like to give a brief introduction on the Boston Youth Dialogue and Advocacy, a nonprofit organization devoted to promoting interfaith and intercultural dialogue. We welcome everyone in our society with practical programs to connect people in the real world. Our goal is to build loyal relationships to collaborate on service projects that benefit society and promote universal principles, all in order to contribute to greater understanding and peace. We passionately believe in the power of dialogue to change attitudes, which is why we're here today. That's enough about us. Let's turn to our speakers. Today, we have Dr. Zuleyha with us as our first speaker. She's a senior lecturer and coordinator of Turkish and Ottoman language program at the Middle Eastern Studies Department at Columbia University. Previously, she taught at the University of Minnesota in Global Studies Department. She received her bachelor in Arabic language and literature from Istanbul University in Turkey. She holds 2 master's degrees, one in comparative literature in Arabic literature in Marmara University, Istanbul, and one in Central Eurasian Studies, Ottoman and Modern Turkish Studies in Indiana University. Her PhD dissertation is on the portrayal of women of biblical and Quranic Joseph's story from Indiana University. She has been a board member at Respect Graduate School in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and voluntarily teaching courses on Islam. Some of the courses are Islam 101, Who's Muhammad, and recently a graduate course on Essentials of Islamic Spirituality. She's passionate about teaching. She's married for 20 years and has 2 cats. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Colak.
An honor to be here with you today, and actually I will be teaching a course next spring about women in Islam at Respect Graduate School. So it's also a new news that I can give. So it's a great honor to be with Craig together here, because his book and the chapter I'm sure he will talk about is a crystal clear view of the woman in Islam. So I will try to give a framework of reference for us to, look at these topics, first of all. And, as my time allows, I'll try to make some points about the issue. And I'm sure Craig will make an excellent job, as crystal clear as it is in his book. So everything will be complementary, and hopefully will give us a broader view about the subject. So I want to point out one thing first, is that from the Quranic framework, there are 4 resources for us in our everyday life. Okay, this is Precious. She loves to be a part of the scene all the time. So she just wants to be seen. So there are 4 resources that we get to know about the Creator. So everything, when we talk about Islam and Quran, we need to be able to combine these 4 let's say, point of view or resources at the same time. So the first one is revelation, the books, the holy books. And whatever we learn from the holy books, we also combine it with the prophetic example. How does this verse from the Quran came to be lived in the life of the prophet? So they are complementary to each other. The third one is the universe. We live in the universe, so it also gives us a view about how to confirm the truth of the Quran as well. And the last one is human conscience. So whatever we learn from the Quran and from the Prophet and what we see in the universe, eventually everything comes down to our conscience. Does it make sense to us? Is it possible for us to confirm it with our mind, with our emotions, with our heart? So that's also very important. And these four sources give us a framework where we can double check everything with each other. So I think this is very critical when we look at the women's issues in the Quran as well. So and another point I want to make before we get started is that we are the children of our time, and we have been trained with Western education or secular education, maybe all over the world. We don't receive, many of us don't receive religious education. And even if we do, then there is this divided mindset. We see everything from the angle of, this is my secular life, and when I worship, this is my religious life. So this is a divided mind. In the Quranic framework, there is no division in life. There is no secular parts of life. You are in the presence of God. There is a constant creation in the universe. So everything we talk about in the Quran and in the universe, in the prophetic example, actually relates to us here and now. So it is important for us. And also the education that we received is reason-centered. So we try to understand everything with our mind, but in the Quranic framework, heart is more essential than the reason. The reason is only gathering the information to heart, but heart is the one that becomes, an embodied example of what we think, what we feel. So, and with the issues of women in Islam, there are also feminist theories, Western education, in relations to men and women, and it's always portrayed as a power struggle. So, where is my rights? Who is giving whom the rights? There is always this struggle. But from the Quranic framework, we don't have this power struggle. We have women and men as two sides of the one coin. So they are allies with each other. They are not struggling with each other. And we live in an individualistic society and materialistic culture. And as I mentioned, our minds are divided as secular and religious, which is not true from the Quranic framework. And, the Quranic framework is faith-centered rather than fiqh-centered. Fiqh is all about rules. But when we communicate with the Quran, we see the world from the perspective of faith, and the fundamental point of view is that how we see this world from the lens of the Quran, from the lens that it teaches us, it allows us to get to know our Creator, and in doing so, we are allies with other people, men and women together, and with our social life, etc. So faith-centered versus fiqh-centered aspect to women's issues, that also, determines the discussions. And of course, we can derive principles from the, fiqh, and we can implement them here. Because when we think about the fiqh rules, we talk about 1400 years ago, and unfortunately in the Islamic tradition, they are not updated, and they're not, most of them are not in relation to questions that we have today. So we need to be able to see those principles and somehow see the world, see the life, see the issues from that lens today. And so we can also say that Quran is truth-centered, but our culture is self-centered. So we also go through some translation problems because Arabic is the language of the Quran, and it's Quran is a code that comes down from God's, it's a verbatim word of God, and what is essential is that there are multi-layered structure that we need to understand, and in each time we communicate with the Quran through our needs, through our needs that are met, and the translations generally does not, they don't reveal us those multi-layered perspectives. It's generally the commentaries of the Quran. So, and there is also the limitations of the Arabic language, that, the terminology that we use in the Quran and that we use today are different. So, as I mentioned, the men and women in the Quran are two sides of the one coin. They complete each other. So men and women learn from each other, and they walk a life towards the same goal, which is to get to know the Creator and, to become the best version of themselves in their relationship with God, in relation to knowing God. So for that, the term that we look for is taqwa. So that is the, striving for the best. So it makes one better than the other. So according to the Quran, what makes one human being better than the other is taqwa, not the gender, not the social status, not any other thing, but the closeness to God, the relationship that we have with God. And according to Quran, human beings are khalifa, the representative on earth. And God created human beings in his image. So it doesn't make a distinction between the genders. Man and woman, they are created in the image of God, and they just, go through this journey in life together as an ally and try to become the best of their own version. So, so in the Islamic tradition, two main sources are Quran and Sunnah. So I mentioned this as four because Said Nursi gives us this perspective. I think it makes much better sense to be able to connect with all these four layers of the sources. So when we look at the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, with no preconceived notions, the historical evidence from the life of the Prophet offers us a remarkable contrast to our received or inherited cultures. So the most crucial is the anomaly that we see in our contemporary culture is that the perception and the status of women is compared to what we see during the early days of Islam. So the Quran declares that, for Muslim men and women, for believing men and women, for devout men and women, men and women, for true men and women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for men and women who humble themselves, for men and women who give in charity, for men and women who fast, for men and women who guard their chastity. We have this, this is Quran 33, chapter 33, verse 35. So God, men and women who engage much in God's praise, for them God has prepared forgiveness and great reward. So in this verse, we see that the gendered nature of Arabic language, Quran refers to men and women separately, and we need to also take it into consideration that Quran was revealed in 23 years. So the society was shaped over these years, and when you make a social change, gradually, you come across with some verses that refer to the previous stages of this gradual change. So that sometimes needs to be thought of, because we cannot, understand if we see the verse as if it is the last version of that gradual change. It doesn't make sense to us most of the time. So another point that I want to make is that the comparison of when we think about how Quran changed the status of women, we need to see it in the historical framework. And when we look at that, at the age of ignorance, which is called Jahiliyyah, at the time of the Prophet, women were not equal in marriage, inheritance, or even education, and they were not allowed to own business, property, or have independent legal rights before Islam. So at some of the rough times, the newborn daughters were often abandoned or buried alive in Arabia. So women were not allowed to choose their husbands or remarry after being widowed. But soon after Islam's birth, the 7th century AD, we started seeing many more women's rights. Women's rights. As you see, Kat's rights are demanded right now. So she's asking for treat, but I don't have any with me. Please, precious, be patient, okay? So we see in the examples of the wife of the Prophet, Khadija, she owned her own business and was treated with the utmost respect by the Prophet himself. And Aisha radiallahu anh was a great scholar at the time of the Prophet and after him. And male scholars would come and consult with him on matters of faith. So, so Allah describes marriage as one of love, mercy, and harmony between two human beings who have entered into a mutual contract. For example, the verse, chapter 20, verse 21 says, "Among his wonders is that he created for you mates out of your own kind, so that you may incline toward them, and he engenders love and tenderness between you. In this, behold, there are messages indeed for people who think." And another verse, chapter 7, 189 says, "It is he who has created you out of one entity." So two sides of one coin comes from here, so that one might incline with love towards the other. So it is this through this institution of marriage, that true expression of given to what the Quran refers to as love and mercy between man and woman, that man and woman are like each other's garments. This is another verse from the Quran, that be you male or female, you are members of one another. And that's another verse, man and woman are protectors of one another. So as we see in some of these examples, Quran talks about men and women completing together to each other. And I'm sure Craig will reference to this one. I think I have around a few, maybe 5 minutes, if I can. I just briefly want to talk a little bit about the great, who were these great women of faith and what was their role in the early years. So we see some Quranic images of women, such as Eve, Asiya, Mary, these are the actually Mary is the only name that is mentioned in the Quran, but we see the other portrayals as well. So as the frontier woman characters at the time, I want to talk briefly about a few. So one of them was Khadija, as I mentioned, and Craig mentions this in his book as well. So it overlaps probably, but she fell in love with the Prophet when she was 15 years older than him and proposed him and married with him. When the Prophet was married with her, he was 25 years old. And Khadija, peace be upon her, was 40 and she had 3 children at the time. And she was an elite woman at the time. She married twice before, who is divorced with 3 children. And we see in her whole lifetime that she spent her whole life and her wealth on the cause of Islam. And she loved and supported and shared everything she had for the cause of Islam. So this is an example of what we learn from the Quran embodies with this example. So she was also a woman of beauty, intelligence, and superior character. And she was known as Tahira, the pure. She was highly sought after by the greatest man of Quraysh at the time. And it was in her quest to hire employees to lead her merchant caravans. She was a businesswoman. And the way she met with the Prophet was through, hiring him in her actually business. So these are extreme examples even for that time. And I also would like to talk a little bit, and one hadith about the Khadija, maybe, peace be upon her, is Prophet upon him be peace, it says, God Almighty never granted me anyone better in this life than her. She accepted me when people rejected me. She believed in me when people doubted me. And she shared her wealth with me when people deprived me. And God granted me children only through her. And we also see the examples of Aisha. This is a totally different example. She's the wife of the Prophet and a scholar and leader of an army against Ali radiallahu anhu, Ali peace be upon him. And she grew up in the household of the Prophet, and she was a prominent scholar, and she was the wife of the Prophet who had perhaps the most influence on the Muslim community after his death. And she played a very central role in the political opposition to the third and fourth caliphs, Osman and Ali radiallahu anhum, even leading an army against Ali radiallahu in 652. Although she retired from political life after her defeat, her major role as a transmitter of Islamic teachings continued after the Prophet. She is one of the major narrators of hadith in the Sunni tradition, and she was among the scholars whom male scholars come and consult with. In many ways, she is among the most controversial figures in early Islam, especially since the implications of her actions for women's participation in scholarship, political life, and the public sphere clashed with later conservative conceptions of the role of women. And for more about Aisha and her legacy, I think Dennis Spellberg's excellent book entitled Politics, Gender, and the Islamic Past would be a good resource. So Aisha and the Prophet would use a code language with each other, denoting their love. She asked the Prophet how he would describe his love for her. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, answered, saying, like a strong binding knot. The more you tug, the stronger it gets, in other words. Every so often, Aisha would playfully ask, how is the knot? And the Prophet would answer, as strong as the first day. So these are great examples. And when she was asked, what did the Prophet used to do in his house? She replied, he used to keep himself busy serving his family. So when one of his companions asked him, who is the most beloved to your heart? He answered instantly, Aisha. And before his death, Prophet Muhammad's very last words to his companions were, treat women with kindness, treat women with kindness. Have fear of God in relation to them and make sure you want well for them. And these were his last public words concerning women, which responded to the meaning of the following revealed verse regarding the life of a couple. And of his signs is that he created for you of yourself spouses, that you might repose in them. And he has set between you love and mercy. Surely there are signs for people who consider. This is Quran chapter 30 and verse 21. So I would like to stop here, even though I'm not done with my talk. I think the time limitations, and also I'm sure Craig will elaborate on a lot of other points. I would like to thank you again for listening to me, and please, Craig, I think Iran will make an introduction first. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Colak. I definitely agree that I really like how you mentioned men and women complete each other, and the only difference between them will be in the eyes of God, Allah, and like that's the only difference between them in taqwa. And I think it's great. It's like nowadays we barely, like, we always have this argument, men is better, woman is better, but in our religion it's not like that. It's more like who's better in the eyes of God. The more you do, the better things you do, the better you get as a person, but not against like the other gender. It's just between you and God, between you and God. Thank you again. Now we have our second speaker, Dr. Craig Considine. He's a scholar, professor, global speaker, media contributor, public intellectual based at the Department of Sociology at Rice University. He's the author of many books and articles. His opinions have been featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, BBC, Fox News, Newsweek, and more. He has been invited to speak at some of the leading international organizations and universities in the world, just like us. He holds a PhD from Trinity College, master's from University of London, bachelor from American University in Washington, D.C. He's a U.S. Catholic of Irish and Italian descent. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Considine.
Thank you, Aram, so much. Professor Colak as well. Thank you as well for those inspiring words on some of the most pressing issues, not only issues, but some of the most important people, really, that have lived in recent memory. I think a lot of Americans don't like to recognize the importance that Muslims have had on civilization and humanity at large. And you were focusing on individuals like Khadija and Aisha. I mean, these are women who are profound individuals, not just Muslims, profound individuals that have so much to teach people today, all of us too. It's not just women, it's men as well. So thank you so much for having me today. And I must say, because there's a Boston link here, I have to drop my Boston line here. I'm a Bostonian by birth, and it is always a real pleasure to connect with my fellow Bostonians. So I'm sending my good tidings and my peace and my love to my fellow Bostonians. I want to start by talking on the nature of the Quran. And I think the Quran is often misunderstood or perhaps misperceived as a book purely for Muslims. And I've had the pleasure throughout my years as a researcher and as an activist to contemplate the Quran, to sit on its passages, to read its passages, to compare the passages to the Quran. And one of the main kind of conclusions, if I could say this, that one of the main conclusions is that human rights and humanity are a key feature of what we might refer to as overarching Quranic principles. And Professor Colak mentioned this issue of Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. And what does that age of ignorance mean? You know, ignorance today means something different, I think, than ignorance in the 7th century. But I think when Muhammad was receiving his the revelations, and when the Quran was being delivered, Jahiliyyah had a very specific context, I think. And again, it has modern parallels, but it's very specific. A couple key features stand out. One is racial equality. And we know through Muhammad's relations with someone like Bilal who was deemed as an outcast because of his race and because he was enslaved. Muhammad often said, if someone deems Bilal as unworthy because of who he is, this is a product of Jahiliyyah. This is the age of ignorance. So Muhammad is basically saying, of course, on behalf of God, to be racist is to be ignorant. And to be ignorant is essentially to fall perhaps outside of the realm of Islam. This is a profound statement. And I think when we talk about, again, the Quran as a whole, when we talk about human rights, we can't divorce women's rights from this. So if the Quran and Muhammad are advocating for racial equality, why would we assume that gender equality would not be part of that? Right? It's kind of fundamental. We're talking about human equality here. The idea that religion, gender, ethnicity, culture, even perhaps sexuality does not divide us and it does not define us. We are fundamentally human beings and God created us this way, and it's our obligation to make sense of it. That's why Muhammad came about. That's why Jesus came about. That's why Moses came about, to make sense of this diversity. So I think fundamentally, it's rooted in the Quran. When we talk about women's rights and equality, it's rooted in the Quran and its humanity. I also want to push us to think beyond the realm of Prophet Muhammad being a mere rights bearer for women, as simply someone who came and said, I am going to give women rights, which he did, which is amazing. The rights to own property, the right to divorce, the right to seek an education, everything that Professor Colak said, and rightly said, succinctly. I don't need to repeat it. But I honestly think that Muhammad was thinking in much bigger proportions than rights. He was thinking about appreciation, finding value in people, not simply saying, okay, this is our political philosophy. We agree that everyone should have a right in society. That's important. We know that. But it's like finding something more meaningful and something deeper in our human relations. And I think ultimately this is what Muhammad was doing when he thought broadly of women. Not simply saying, let's make women equal. We know he was doing that, but he was saying, let's actually find value in women. It sounds almost ridiculous to say that, like as a man myself, I find so much value in the women in my life. And I think Muhammad took a very personal approach to communicating his ideas to the larger ummah. He was very much focused on the women in his life. And that dictated how he envisioned the ummah. So think about his mother, who passed away quite early in his life. Think about the Halima, the wet nurse that took care of him as well. The dynamics here of being an orphan. Muhammad was an orphan. We know that. There are some women today who give up their children, not because they seek to do so, because they feel like they can't take care of a child, which is a really sad kind of development and state. Muhammad, we know, was profoundly in defense of orphans. And I think subliminally, he's defending mothers in that realm as well. When we talk about Khadijah, and Professor Colak, you started getting into who Khadijah was. A woman that was 15 years older than Muhammad. Can you imagine, to give you a kind of contemporary parallel, an influential leader in a society that is willing, and a man by that, who is willing to kind of break the norm in society, to marry someone that is considered more socially valuable, richer, of a higher status. And I think this raises some significant issues with Muhammad's ego. What was his ego, or lack thereof, which is a good thing, by the way. The lack of ego that he had in saying, here's a woman who is independent, strong, powerful, influential, rich. And to be honest, when they were married, Muhammad was 25 and she was 40. Muhammad hadn't reached the stage of prophethood. That came 15 years later. Imagine the type of person that it takes to enter into a relationship like that. And it could happen both ways, right? It's not just a man kind of marrying into a family with a influential woman. Oftentimes women would marry into an influential family with a man. But there takes a certain type of ego to humble yourself and say, I'm okay with this. This is a person that should be respected and appreciated and valued for the simple fact that they are who they are. And it doesn't matter if they're a man or if they're a woman. Muhammad had I think he really had a deep appreciation for who Khadija was, right? So an appreciation. This is so important. It's not just Muhammad was coming and providing rights. He appreciated people. He loved her for what she offered to society through charity, through general goodness, through trade, through commerce, and through business. And I also find it quite interesting if you think about 610, when Muhammad receives the first revelations, the first person he goes to on descending from Mount Hira, who does he go to? He goes to Khadija. Not only does he go to Khadija, but Khadija is offering insight which he believes in. So he trusts Khadija. Right? So now we're getting into it's a deeper appreciation. It's not just saying this superficial, like, yeah, you can do whatever you want to do. You have your rights. It's actually finding value in people. And if we actually expanded this a little bit with, Muhammad coming down from Mount Hira, Khadija is saying, yes, what you have just experienced is real. Even Khadija opening perhaps Muhammad's world to diversity, bringing Muhammad to Waraka ibn Nafal, who is Khadija's cousin. Interesting kind of angle to look at here in terms of what can a woman offer a man? Different perspectives, different worldviews, knowledge. Women have the capacity to do this in people's lives. They're powerful. They have connections. They're knowledgeable. And I really think that this is what, Muhammad was someone, I really do think, that was just impressed by good character and good conduct. And it didn't matter if you were a man or a woman. It didn't matter if you were a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a pagan, whatever, a Persian, a Byzantine, none of that. He cared about human dignity, he cared about humanity, and he cared about who people were. And that's what he was motivated by. So these are profound stories, I think. I really do think these are profound. And of course, with Aisha, Aisha kind of takes it a step beyond Khadija. And Aisha, of course, becomes a statewoman, a scholar, a mufti, a judge, an activist, a politician, and so on, and so a soldier, and so on and so forth. So it makes you wonder, like, what kind of man would support a woman like that? It's a very simple question. What kind of man would support a woman like Khadija and Aisha? who were, by all means, independent, powerful, trustworthy, skillful. That's how Muhammad was approaching this issue. And I think, again, this is profound. And going back to the Quran and Muhammad's, of course, revelations when it comes to someone like Mary, we know that Mary is the only person, only woman that has an entire chapter named after her in the Quran. And it's very similar to the New Testament depiction. And let me say, this is one of the reasons why I love the Quran, because it honors Mary more than the Bible does. That's one of the reasons why I love the Quran. So what is Muhammad suggesting here? Like, I understand this idea that, Mary was a Muslim, right? So like, it's all part of the kind of same tradition, and all the prophets were actually Muslims. But I also think Muhammad was thinking more critically about how a depiction of Mary would be received by future generations of people, understanding that Christians might look to the Quran in the future, saying that Mary is the mother of Jesus and Jesus is the first Christian. So what is Muhammad communicating here? Or what is God communicating through Muhammad? That there is value in women who are outside of the fold of kind of a traditional Islam. That the Quran recognizes the beauty and the power and the purity of someone like Mary. I mean, these are profound points. And I'd say as well, and I think, I hope I've set a stage here to kind of transition to the modern context. And we think about this debate, I suppose, that happens in America and throughout the so-called Muslim world, but also throughout the world when it comes to, women's rights. I mean, think about who Muhammad married, his first wife. Who was she? She was a merchant. She was a businesswoman. She was a leader of a community. Can we really suggest with any kind of credibility or authenticity that Muhammad would not advocate for women to serve in the same roles and the same positions that his first wife served in? I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. Of course he wouldn't. Of course he would advocate for women being who they want to be. Of course, under a guideline of rights and God, and I get all that, but who did he marry? And who were these women? That tells us more than the rights that he gave, because the relationship that he had with them is authentic, and it's rooted in love. It's rooted in appreciation. It's rooted in trust. It's rooted in dignity. What is more important than any of these things? Very few things, I think. And Professor Colak, you also mentioned the farewell sermon, which is not a very long sermon, by the way. There aren't a lot of kind of key principles. I think if we were to take 7 or 8 principles away from the farewell sermon, I think that would kind of capture it. We have, of course, racial equality, talking about an Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab. But as I talk about in my book, we also have a passage about women. So think about this. Like, this is a Muhammad, outside of being a prophet. He's a head of state. He is the leader of a community, of a nation. And he may feel like he is on his way out. And by that, I mean, he feels like his life is nearing its end. So he comes up with one speech to deliver the final message. And one of these messages was about women. And he says, as Professor Colak mentioned, do treat your women well and be kind to them, for they are your partners and committed helpers. A very simple statement that should be interpreted in a very simple way. Don't overthink it. Treat your women well. This is dignity, respect, decency, and love. It's not complicated. It doesn't have to be about rights. It has to be about fundamental human dignity. And I'd like to wrap up by saying something about women's rights in the context of the clash of civilizations, which is a theory that I think is flawed fundamentally. And I'm concerned that there are some people who belong to certain religious traditions that feel like they can't integrate into society. They can't be, let's say, an independent Western woman in the American context, because in doing so, they would be selling out to the West or to American culture. That needs to stop. This is the tradition of Muhammad. This is the tradition of the Quran. This is the tradition of Islam. And that is revealed through other religious traditions. This idea of women's rights is ingrained in Muhammad's relationships with the people that matter to him most. So there's no contradiction here in terms of living in a society in which women are not only given rights, it's not about that. They feel empowered. They feel empowered. They feel like they can be themselves and they can be successful and they can be what they want to be, all while maintaining their obligations as a human being and as a mother and as a wife and all of these things. So I think we need to move beyond the rights issue. I'll end on that. I think we need to move beyond the rights issue and talk about genuine appreciation and love, not only for women, but also in appreciation for Muhammad's approach to integrating women into the Ummah and, of course, world philosophy, if I could say that. So I'll send it back.
Thank you, Dr. Considine. I think it's very interesting that you mentioned how it's not about the rights, the laws. It's more about like understanding and like just appreciating. And instead of just saying, oh, they have these rights, no, just like appreciate them, just have them, and just treat them as equally, love them. Everything you mentioned, like I think it's a great point. And I think in today's world, we're just so lost and like we're just trying to make sure, oh, there's laws, there's rights for everything, but we can just be humans and respect each other and like treat each other as like just one another and like perfectly fine with it.
But Aaron, can I add something here? Like, you know, I don't think a society can integrate this idea of just like throwing rights out there, like just giving rights to people doesn't make sense. It's like too over the top. If people appreciate people first and foremost, if they see value in people, then the right to give them a right makes sense, because you're like, yes, this person is my friend. They're my family member. They're a productive member of society. That's all good. But I think I'm concerned with modern society. Like we focus too much on these things of just like pushing rights, which are important. I'm not saying that they're not important, but I'm saying like there's too big of a jump. We have to do the little groundwork to establish the appreciation, the humanity, and the love of people before we get to that political level. That's what I would say.
I agree. I think if we just appreciated, as you said, we wouldn't even need to put the rights out there, because like everyone would be like, it would be just common sense. Like there wouldn't be any need for any laws, any rights, and no one would be arguing over those because it's just common for everyone. It's just out there already.
It's natural, right? It's natural. It's humanity. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, well, hopefully soon the world will become a better place where we won't need more rights, but we'll just love each other.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you again on behalf of everyone. Thanks to our speakers, Dr. Craig and Dr. Colak. Your words are truly eye-opening, and we're so grateful to have you both here. I think we already have a couple of questions on the chat, and we can just start the QA session if you both okay with it.
Sure.
All right. Let me just go up. All right. Someone said, I have a question. Why are the values of women not the same as mentioned in Quran, especially in most of the Muslim countries?
Can you repeat the question, Iram?
Why are the values of women not the same as mentioned in Quran, especially in most of the Muslim countries?
That's a good question. I mean, this is, I think, something, if I can start, I'm sure Craig will say a lot. So I think one of the distinction that we need to make is between Islam and the Muslim. So Islam is the concept that, that means, the, guided principles that we learn from Islam, from the sources of Islam, Quran, Sunnah, and, the universe and our human conscience. So if something doesn't make sense to us, so this distinction between the culture and the, guiding principles, there is a problem with human, practices, but it doesn't only the Muslim societies. Unfortunately, the performance that we show as a Muslim society in our culture is does not reflect the ideals of the Quran, but it did at some point at the time of the Prophet. So those are the ideals that we strive to become. So, so it is the difference between Islam and the Muslim. And Muslim is the people, the human beings. And we always, as a human being, even though we want to be ideal, we want to do everything perfect. But when we look at our cultures, unfortunately, we don't see the perfect picture. But it doesn't mean that we are not striving for it. So we are in the process. And most of the things that become a problem in the culture, they don't come from the Islamic guiding principles. It comes from people's ignorance, people's lack of education, people's lack of vision or lack of decency sometimes. So it is the problem of human being. Wherever you go in today's world, actually, it doesn't matter. In the Western world, we come across with human rights, women's rights issues. A lot of problems are today's problems as well. So I think it would be, nice to see everything, for example, for myself, if I want to embody the principles, the ideals of the Quran, so I'm responsible for it. So if everyone thinks of this as a vision, as a duty, as a responsibility, then we would be able to put out a better version of Islamic ideals. So I think this the difference between culture and the faith is a common question for all traditions. They come across with a lot of negative examples, and they don't come because of the religion. They come because of the humans, lack of knowledge, lack of education, lack of decency, lack of being able to represent, embody the principles of the faith.
Aaron, can I say something in addition to Professor Colak?
Yeah, of course.
So I agree with Professor Colak in the sense that there should be a distinguishing feature between the religion and the people. And one thing that I've been kind of looking at in recent years in the context of Christianity in America, so kind of bringing us down a different little road here, but it'll make sense. There's a tension in America at the moment with Jesus and Darwin. So Jesus is the prophet of compassion, of love, of peace. This is who we understand Jesus to be in the New Testament. I'm not sure how any Christian that is able to read the text can come up with any type of conclusion otherwise, that this is a man of the people. However, in the American context, we also have this Darwinian component. And the Darwinian component is not about religion. It's about science. It's about this idea of like racial superiority through like genes and DNA and survival of the fittest. And this idea of like, if you're familiar with the movie like Hunger Games, like a Hunger Games society in which like all of these different groups are competing with one another. So there's no Jesus in this realm. There's no compassion. There's no mercy. And I'm concerned that a lot of Americans in the United States at the moment who happen to be Christian are not Jesus followers. They're Darwinian followers. And this is important because if a Christian in this country happens to be hyper competitive, okay, hyper competitive and like anti-immigrant and anti all this stuff, yet still somehow defines themselves as a Christian, I think it's our kind of duty to make sure that we're distinguishing between their self-identified religion, their identity, and the religion itself. Because my Christianity is not Darwinian at all. And I feel like most religions are suffering from this as well. Even honestly, like if I can add real quick, even in the Israel, Jewish, Judaism context, you know, what we see now is like the state of Israel and the actions of the state of Israel being reflected on Judaism and the Jewish people. And there's a huge difference here. I mean, Israel is a political state. Judaism is a religion. The Jewish people are a people. But all of these things are being conflated. And I think, Professor Colak, I think that's what you were kind of distinguishing between. Like there's a religion and a people. And we have to understand that there's differences between these two elements.
Yes, I agree. It's more like people than the religion itself that like not making the religion look good, but
Yeah.
they just follow the religion. I think it would be not like right now, I think. We have another question about how can Muslim women effectively work to push against the biases that they face, both in Islamic community and the greater community?
Can I say something like be like Professor Colak? Be a scholar, be someone who's seeking the truth, being someone who is a teacher, who is looked upon as a leader. I mean, this is the thing like that I find problematic. It's like, you know, what can Muslim women do to improve their condition in America? Like it's already being done. Like there are so many examples of just like Muslim women in this country who are already doing amazing things. It's just we don't hear about their stories. So people are kind of confused or they think that something's missing. Nothing's missing. Everything that is good is already being done. And Professor Colak, I hope I didn't embarrass you there with that.
Astaghfirullah. That's your, Husnudan, that's your good thinking, and I accept it as a prayer. So hopefully God will turn me into a good one. So what I would like to say on this matter is that, as you just said, Craig, there is this portrayal in the media, and we don't get to hear a lot about the stories of Muslim women. I think we have many examples are all over in life, in every status, in every level of life. We can point out, the role models or examples of Muslim women, but it is just this, overarching bias in the society that we have to defend ourselves. Why do I have to defend myself? Like, I think I remember once in my class, one of my students came to me and said that he is taking this core course, and there is a forum in the core course about the main, works of main traditions, main religions, and they read about Quran and they discuss about the woman's situation in the Quran. And he came to me and he was about to cry. He was like, "You don't know, professor, they're so ignorant, they don't know." And, you know, and he said that he told them that what they are talking about is wrong because he knows someone. So, as you just said, if we become good examples, inshallah, with, God willing, then people will be able to relate to it. That is the most effective way, just to become one. You can talk. Why do we defend ourselves? First of all, we don't need to be in defense mode. We just need to become. We just need to be in constant striving to be a better version of ourselves, and appreciate people around us and to become a better version of ourselves. I don't think we need to defend ourselves. It is a psychology that is, the culture is trying to put it on us. It's like a dress. They are trying to dress us up with it. If you reject the dress, no, this is not me, it doesn't fit me, and I don't want to dress it like this. That misconceptions will be, I think, erased in the minds of the people when we become the ideal that we defend, the ideal that we inspire to be. So I don't think we need to say anything or defend it. We just need to focus on to be, just to become a good example.
And I think like that is that not kind of going back to the mindset of Muhammad with like people like Aisha and Khadija? Like they rest in themselves. There's no defense needed with their character and conduct. They've already established themselves and they exist as they are and they're legitimate as they are. You don't need a man to defend who these women are. They exist as they are. And I think, Professor Colak, you're touching on a really important point there.
All right. Our next question is going to be, how would you compare women in Islam to women in other religions?
I think this is a great question because, especially when I was teaching a course at the University of Minnesota, it was a course on women in Islam, and I took a different perspective to it, and the students were very, they were very shocked. So they asked me about the veil, and they said that, this veil is a symbol of, being oppressed, blah, blah, blah. And then I started finding pictures of women from all other religions, monotheistic religions. I started with, Buddhism. And then, the pictures of religious women are most of the time in many religions, you can find examples of that, is head covered, because the head cover is the symbol of, once I had a Christian friend, and whatever I told her about the head cover, she wasn't convinced. And one day I told her, you know what, this is just a reminder for me that I'm in the presence of God. I need this reminder, and the society needs this reminder too. So this is for me just, because my constant strive is to realize that I don't forget that I am connected with the Creator, and, that I act, in this knowledge, in this awareness. So she said at the time, this is it. This convinced me. This was the answer that I was looking for. So if we look at other monotheistic religions, we will see great women's examples, just like we see it in the Islamic tradition. I don't think there is any distinction. I would just recommend the person who asked this question to look up Google for images from different monotheistic religions, women. If you look at the pictures of Mary, the depictions of Mary in the Christian tradition, have you ever come across with a depiction that there was no head cover? No, I haven't seen anything. I looked for it, and I couldn't find any. So it is, I think the role models and the examples would not surprise us, because it is not based on who is better than who. They all strive to be who they can become as the best version of themselves.
And you know what, Professor Kolak, my Nana, so Nana is a term that Italians use for grandmother. My Nana, her name was Angelina Alonso, and her father was named Loretto Alonso, and her mother was Maria Nemo. And they were coming from southern Italy over to America in the early 1900s as immigrants, as many Italians did. And perhaps surprisingly to many viewers here today, all the women in this family, which were fundamentally Catholic, would cover up when they left their house. I remember as a kid growing up in Boston, when I would go to the grocery store with my Nana, she would wear hijab. She would wear a covering over herself. And I think there's an important kind of point to mention here. And I'm concerned that people may view like America and Christianity through the lens of kind of unveiled women, but it hasn't always been that way. Like, we're just living in a time where many Catholic women, in my context, do not cover, but less than 100 years ago, they were covering. So there must be something there, right? In the faith, in the tradition, in the culture that is influencing people to cover. So culture comes in, American culture comes in, secularization comes in, the need to integrate comes in, and people start dropping practices. But dropping the practices should not be a criticism on Christianity. It should not mean necessarily that somehow Christianity is no longer modest or that it's lost its modest core. That's a problem, I think, because we start treating Christianity as a monolith. I mean, I know fundamentally, even my wife, Miriam, like when we go to church, she covers. She doesn't wear a head cover, but she covers. Mm-hmm. And people don't recognize this, and they don't understand the meaning of this. And I'm afraid like most of the world just looks at America as just this out of control place in which women they have no bounds. And I just don't think it's the case.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's more like a personal choice, or like people feel like stopping their not their culture, but their like habits or their things they usually do based on like just their opinions change or to be more accepted by society or like people around them. But I think we shouldn't relate that to the religion itself, but the people.
Yeah. And the culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
People and culture. Yeah. 100%.
Like you said before, Christians were covering, Muslims cover, Jewish people used to cover, but now in today's like society, they don't. But that doesn't mean it's on the religion itself. It's just the people, like their opinion changed. They just don't want to do it anymore. Like the cultural differences not let them to like practice their own stuff or like anything. So I think it's on people more than just the religion itself.
I think it has to do something with the dominant culture as well. The overarching dominant culture started to show something different, through media and etc. So, it's always, a difficulty, a challenge to be among the, while you are still in the culture, in the dominant culture, and to keep your own identity as you want it to be seen. So it's a challenge, because we see that until 20th century, for example, Jewish women were covering themselves, and we see in the films, even the films from 1920s, 1950s, the Christian woman, church. It is, we see those examples in the media. I think it has to do with this dominant culture, which became very much secular, and people didn't want to show the signs of religiosity in the public sphere. And it doesn't mean they lost it. It's just a matter of ijtihad. They made the ijtihad that it would be wiser for them, just to keep it for themselves in their private, areas such as church or home, And it takes a courage also to be able to show those signs when the dominant culture is not, showing those examples. It's not easy. I mean, especially with the portrayal of the media, advertisements, etc. There is a change in time, and that's why when we talk about these issues, I think we need to go at least before the 20th century to see some, changes as well, to realize that this happened in the last century.
Professor Colak, I think you're a secret sociologist in analyzing it this way. And I use a 3-tiered framework to talk about these type of issues: assimilation, integration, and inclusion. So assimilation is essentially when you drop all of your ancestral cultural features and you become like the norm or the mainstream, as Professor Colak is saying, the kind of hegemonic culture, the mainstream culture, which isn't, I think, very healthy for people. Like, you should be able to, let's say, integrate, which is the second theme. So you can maintain some of your elements, right? You can wear hijab in a place of, in a business. If you're an employee, you can keep that. And then we have inclusion. And inclusion is when not only are you integrated, but you're appreciated and you feel like you belong. And I think that's the ideal of American society, of inclusion. It's not about everyone, becoming American and being the same and thinking the same. It's living with this diversity. How do we live with this diversity? How can we include all of these different groups and cultures and races and ethnicities in a way where people can feel like they're themselves, and then society can also feel like it can operate in a way that is harmonious and it's not disruptive. So these are, every group in America has dealt with this. Every group has dealt with it. And we're living in an era now where, unfortunately, Muslims are in the spotlight. And this is one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this subject, because as an Irish Italian Catholic from Boston, I know what my people went through. I know what they went through. I know what they went through in this country, and I know what they went through in Europe. And to not stand up for the rights of my fellow citizens who happen to be Muslim, if I don't stand up for their rights and I don't stand in solidarity with them, am I honoring my ancestors? I'm not. And if I'm not honoring my ancestors, I think I have a fundamental soul problem. I have a soul issue that I can't I have to reconcile. That's where I stand.
I agree. As you mentioned on your, I think it was a question before, you said there's like two types of Christianity. One is more based on like Jesus, and the other one is more based on like evolution, Darwinism. And like you said, if you are more like following Jesus and like his ideologies, like what he brought up to this world, I think it's more fair to be open to everyone, not just like your people or like your gender, your ethnicity, your religion. You can just be for everyone, like be out there for everyone. Like you said, you're here for us, you're supporting us, you're like supporter for us, even though you're not Muslim, but you were here giving us speech, helping us go through this. And I think that's what like many Christian people or like any religion think. They're just like focused on, oh, my religion is the best, I'm the only one who's right. So they just like support themselves and no one else. And I think it's just like one of the biggest reasons why we're having these disconnections between like groups of peoples and like countries and everyone.
And we get so hung up on identity categories and practice. Like we get so hung up on, is this person Muslim or is this person not Muslim? Is this person Christian or are they not Christian? Like I don't practice Islam in terms of its rituals. You know, I don't pray in a similar way that Muslims do on an everyday basis. I say different prayers. But if you wanted to extend the boundary of like Islam and like what it means to be a Muslim, I'm sure I could find a way to connect with that. You know what I mean? Of humanity, of everything we've talked about today. Like, yeah, I can link with that. And I think that's kind of how America needs to start evolving when it talks about not only religion, but race, ethnicity, like finding ways of connecting and finding each other and finding similarities across these perceived divides.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we have a couple more questions. I think I just said this one. Someone said, Dr. Considine, you mentioned that Prophet Muhammad's defense of orphans indicates his defense of mothers. Could you further explain this interesting connection?
I mean, a mother who is not able to take care of their child is something horrific. A mother that is carrying a human being in themselves, in their belly for a term, and then feeling like they can't take care of this child and to have to give it up to adoption. I could honestly not think of anything more traumatic than that. I mean, I have, you know, obviously Miriam, my wife, like gave birth 7 months ago. And I know like just the physical connection that is between a mother and her child. So Muhammad is thinking to himself, like orphans are not, it's not just about necessarily a parent passing away. It's about two people coming together, having a child, and potentially not being able to take care of that. And that raises issues pertaining to a woman's ability to take care of themselves, to take care of herself. If you have to give up a child, that's to me a failure of society. Society is failing that woman. She shouldn't have to ever do something like that. And I think Muhammad was very concerned about these cases of people that are stuck in these situations where they have to give up people. And also Muhammad was an orphan. He didn't have a mother for the overwhelming majority of his life. And that must have left a hole in him, no? I mean, you would imagine. So he must have had like an appreciation for this. I don't want to stereotypically describe women here, but like this tenderness, this love, like something that mothers can give you that no one else can give you. I think Muhammad missed that. And I think that's why he loved mothers and why he appreciated mothers so much.
All right. Well, thank you for your answer on that one. We have one last question. How can we change the negative opinions about women in Islam? Do you have any advice? What should we do for this?
That's a good question. As I mentioned earlier, the first step is to be who we represent, who we, think that it should be out there in the society. And also, I think it starts within the family. We need to, raise the children with those values, first of all, because the family is the seed of the society. So the example should start in the family. And education is important. We need to raise our children in such a way that they know their own culture and values, and they are also open to the communities that they live in, being able to respect themselves and also the other, in the society, becoming a part of the society, especially starting from small local societies, local communities. just being ingrained with the culture, being integrated with the culture that we live in, being a part of the culture as who we are, and being authentic to ourselves and within with integrity, just be there as who we are, and being open to to accept everyone as they are. I think that is the key. And education is another point of view, because this culture, it's not easy to be yourself and also to be a part of the society. So we need to educate ourselves in really strong terms about who we are, what is our identity, what is our values, whatever tradition we are coming from, we need to know our values really well. And then, and to know that knowing is not enough. Real knowledge is the embodiment of that knowledge. So we, work on uh, becoming, representing the ideals, the values, and then it will spread. I mean, it is, the good things spread really fast, just like the bad things. So if we increase the number of good things, then the change might happen in a very short period of time, because good is always infectious. Everybody loves good. Everybody within their nature, they want to be good, and they want to treat others. They want to be treated by others in a good way. So it is spread easily. It is in our innate nature that we don't need to, we just need to be and try to express it in our way.
Yeah, powerful words. Kind of be the change that you want to see in the world, as Gandhi said. And I agree with Professor Colak, like starting with ourselves, like that's where change always happens. Never expect change to happen in society. It starts with you. It starts with the people that you communicate with. It starts with your family. It starts at a very micro sociological community level. And that's powerful to us. Like that's agency, that's autonomy. That's us being able to dictate who we are and who we want to be. And we should not expect other forces in society to kind of bend the knee to us. I'll say this though, at a critical level. I am thinking that the representation of women in the media is a very powerful force, for better or for worse at this point. And I think the image that people have and the thoughts that people have of a certain category, like if I'm to be blunt, of like Muslim women, oftentimes that image is relayed through the media. And I think it's a pretty complicated situation, but I think Muslim women, if I can encourage them to do this, of course, I'm not telling anyone to do anything. It's not my place to do it, but to get into the media and to take control of their own narrative rather than allowing news outlets and journalists to kind of define what a Muslim woman is and what a Muslim woman isn't. And this is much bigger than Muslim women. It's with everyone, like I wouldn't want someone defining what it means to be a Bostonian or an Irish American or an Italian American. But I do think when we talk about Islam in America, the media coverage is pretty poor, to put it in nice terms. Yeah. And to put it in nice terms. So I would like to see, I guess it's like courage or forthrightness to get into that media sphere and to like make a dent and to kind of put the stake down in the ground and say, we're here and this is who we are. And we're not going to let any outside force kind of dictate our image. I think that's really, it's hard to do. It's very hard to do, but I hope it happens.
I hope so.
Well, I think we just need to own it as a woman and Muslim. A second, so just go for it, I think. Whatever we have. All right, I think that was the last question. I think it just concludes our Q&A session. Thank you again for Dr. Colak and Dr. Considine for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure to having you both.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Iram, for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be a part of this program. Thank you.
I feel the same. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Also, I thank everyone who is here with us today. I hope to see you all in the future links. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Take care.